Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Almost at the end of the day. Thanks for pushing through. This is our conversation about building workforce readiness with high school work-based learning. So I'm excited to have this conversation. With us today is Pam Gordon, the Emblaze coach for Big Picture Learning. Implementation, coach for Big Picture Learning. Nina Pandey, Executive Director for Skills for Rhode Island's Future. Lena Neely, Associate Director of Programs for Apprentice Learning. And Bob LePage, Assistant Secretary for Career and Technical Education for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Julie Lammers, Senior Vice President of Advocacy and Corporate Social Responsibility for American Student Assistance. ASA is a Boston-based national nonprofit focused on college and career readiness issues starting in middle school. And we work to help kids as young as middle school learn about careers and navigate a path to post-secondary education and career success. So, work-based learning opportunities like internships and cooperative education experiences have really helped kids to build a workplace identity, build social capital, and build technical and interpersonal skills that we know kids need to succeed. And at the same time, businesses are also struggling to cultivate a pipeline of talent. And yet, work-based learning experiences for high school students in particular are really hard to find. And ASA study from a few years ago found that only about 2% of high school students graduated with a work-based learning experience. And so we know it's critical to start building these opportunities. They provide opportunities to contextualize learning for students, is proven to improve retention and engagement rates, help kids think deliberately about their career trajectory, things they like, the things that they hate, just as importantly, and really set long-term career goals. So we're excited to have some experts with us today to talk about this issue. Pam, I'm going to start with you. And just talk a little bit about the BPL, the Big Picture Learning model. And actually, maybe before we ask the question, maybe we can all go down the line and talk a little bit about your individual organizations and sort of your role in this work. So Nina, I'll start with you.
Certainly. Thank you, Julie. Good afternoon, everyone. As Julie mentioned, my name is Nina Pandey, and I'm the Executive Director of a workforce development agency in Rhode Island called Skills for Rhode Island's Future. We are a demand-driven workforce entity, so in our model, we start with employers. In Rhode Island, we represent over 250 employer partners, uniquely understand their hiring needs, and then we map back solutions to be able to build the pipelines for those jobs that need to be filled in the local economy.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lena Neely. I'm the Associate Director for Apprentice Learning, and I believe we are the only organization here that on this panel that works with middle school students. So Apprentice Learning provides real-world work experiences for middle grade students. What we do is that we leverage career exploration, teach skills, ignite purpose, and to help them elevate their dreams. And we do that in direct partnership with schools and employers.
Hi everyone, I'm Pam Gordon. I play a variety of roles in Big Picture, so my title wasn't very easy to come up with. But Big Picture Learning is an organization that has a network of schools across the country and around the world. We have about 75 schools around the country and 150, I think, around the world. And our schools focus on personalized learning and real-world learning. And our students, in most of the schools, students are in the classroom 3 days a week, working with an advisor and an advisory and really thinking about their interests and passions, and I should make this shorter, but and then they spend 2 days a week in the real world working with mentors and experts in the field. And we have a variety of other initiatives too that work beyond the Big Picture schools with work-based learning.
So Bob LePage, Assistant Secretary and Executive Office of Education, and in my role I've been working with both our educational agencies, Department of Higher Ed, as well as Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, and Early Education and Workforce Development and Pathway Strategies for youth, and then Department of Higher Ed, and in particular our community college system and our vocational schools and adult pathways. And then in that role, I work hand in glove and shoe and new socks. Green ones, I got them somewhere. I just have to share these with Jen James with labor and economic development in what's called the Workforce Skills Cabinet, which works on the integration of those as strategies to improve the quality of the workforce here in the Commonwealth.
Great, thanks, Bob. So back to you, Pam. Now you're on the hot seat. So big picture learning has really been at the forefront of this effort for a number of years, pushing this idea that out-of-school learning can really drive student engagement. But the model that you mentioned is one that allows kids to both learn in the classroom and really leave school in order to experience real world work. But you operate in district schools. You operate in a public school system. So how do you help school districts remove many of the barriers that they often face when trying to set up a work-based learning program? Liability issues, transportation issues, all of those challenges that we know are reasons to say no to work-based learning experience. How has big picture learning so successfully helped to navigate some of those things? And it's a big question to start with.
That is a really big question. So so that's actually a really important point is we have schools that kind of run the gamut of also include charter. I think there are some independent schools, but most of our schools are district schools, and so it is a challenge. It is a barrier. The school I have worked most closely with in Leominster, so there are 2 big picture schools in Massachusetts, for those of you who are from Massachusetts. Transportation's an issue. In many places, the schools really tap into public transportation. Liability is an issue. As you walk into a business with a 16-year-old and the business says, I can't do that. We work with school districts to help carry those liability pieces. It is, I think, another big piece, and I didn't say this in my introduction, is there's a big kind of management of these students. So we have big picture schools, but we also work with a lot of school districts that are not necessarily becoming part of the big picture network, but what they're doing is their goal is to have most of their students out in work-based learning experiences. And so we have an internship management platform called Emblaze that was developed by people at Big Picture. Apprentice Learning is gonna use it next year. We're really grateful about that. So that's a barrier. So one barrier is just like the pure logistics of running a work-based learning program in your school and having students out and here our Emblaze has a GPS locator. Students have an app they put on their phone. When a student, it's a way for one of the kind of features of Emblaze is that students can check in and check out of their internship. As a teacher, when I sent my students out to internships, I wanted to know that my student got to their internship, and they could text me, they could call me, but with Emblaze, I could know that they were actually there. It doesn't, because of all sorts of privacy issues, we don't follow them through the day, but I do know that where they checked in. So that's, I think, actually pretty helpful with school districts when we talk to them about kind of getting students out and sort of all those liability issues and those types of things. I think we've developed different little, well, that's a big thing. Emblaze it's huge. It's not
that management piece is really big. And so the work-based learning is incredibly hard to scale. It is in-person is sort of seen as sort of a one-on-one in-person opportunity. How have you used technology to help scale some of these programs? Emblaze, I know you've got a new program that you're trying to work outside of schools, digital programs. So talk a little bit about this.
So Emblaze is the one that has really helped. I think it's helped with it was developed in a big picture school. It's helped with those students getting out, but it's also helped school districts that don't have the design that a big picture school has. And recently I'm working with the school district of Manchester, New Hampshire, would like every student by the time they graduate to have an experience, if not more than one, outside of the classroom. And so using something like Emblaze is going to help them manage this. It's also going to help a huge piece is about equity and opportunity, and so In-Place starts with a database of opportunities, or it starts with the students and the teachers and the community building a database of opportunities. And so when students have access to this app, they then have access to all these opportunities. But the other piece that you're talking about, too, that you were asking about too, is this is brand new, it's in its very early stages, something called Be Unbound. So we're also trying to kind of scale by not being attached to a school district and going, I was in a panel this morning and you were talking about, or someone was talking about direct to student. That was the phrase that was being used. And so Be Unbound, we're figuring out how it's gonna work, but we're hoping that we're trying to create a global In-Place database, and students can be part of the Be Unbound program, and they can connect with other students, but most importantly, they can connect with adults and mentors. And I think, I haven't really said it yet, but at the root of this is we really truly believe, well, we believe every student should have every student in the country, in the world, should have a work-based learning experience before they graduate from high school, at least one. But also what's really important is that connection and that social capital and the connection to a mentor and somebody who's an expert in a field that a student might be interested in learning about. And they might not. They might find out they're not interested in that. And that's one of the most important things.
Absolutely. Nina, let's turn to you for a second. So one of your goals in Rhode Island is to ensure every high school junior has a work-based learning experience prior to completing high school. Just tell us a little bit about your model and how that's shifted in the last couple of years and what you see going forward.
Certainly. So slightly different than what Pam described. In our internship program, our agency serves as the employer of record. And so we actually eliminate a lot of those barriers that Pam needs to navigate as they're working in school districts. So we take on the workers' compensation, we take on the wages, we raise funds to be able to pay for that. ASA is one of our funders. And what we try to do is make sure that we align that work-based learning experience with the career interests of students. And so they go through a fairly rigorous application process with us. And to ensure equity and access, 50% of the students that are in our program need to come from a priority school district, a Title I school, historically low performing, all of the, those indicators that we know that go along with success. And we match with our employer partners, and they provide the work experience, but again, the students are employed and put on the payroll at Skills for Rhode Island's Future. Through the pandemic, place-based internship opportunities were essentially no longer available, so we actually pivot our model to a virtual model for 2 years where we ran something called the Innovation Challenge. We continued the practice of being demand-driven, and so we had our employer partners work with us on design thinking on what these virtual work experiences could look like, and we went to a project-based model that was based on real-world situations that companies were working through. So we were working with a defense contractor who was developing a prototype for a COVID-19 detector for the US military. And so they hosted a group of students who were working on a prototype that they were able to do virtually. They were learning about 3D drawing. We went through kind of this sprint-based approach to how do you ideate, to how do you then begin doing your research, and then how do you go to prototype. And in that career journey, the students were able to meet with engineers, doctors, folks from the National Guard, the General of the National Guard, and they were able to go through these really incredible project-based learnings that our employers were going through. So we tried to simulate that real-world experience, but doing it virtually. We had tremendous success the first year. The second year, I think Zoom fatigue had set in, but the students still had quite a few learnings. This summer, we're going back to place-based. But I think we're going to land in a hybrid world. I think we are exploring what ongoing virtual work experiences can look like. There was a lot of great engagement. There was a lot of great learning, if done well. And if done in a challenging environment, the students really thrived when it was available. And it's our way to be able to bring those work-based learning experiences to everybody, because there's just simply not enough opportunity for the number of students that would require it. So again, we're moving in that hybrid world and using technology to our advantage.
And the reality is, going back to an office is not reality for most workplaces.
It is.
So how do you help kids build the skills to work remotely as well? I think is one thing that you have tried to tackle. Talk a little bit about how you are looking to shift to, your current model is a summer model, but I know you have a strong desire to make a year-round internship a reality. Tell us a little bit about why that you feel it's so important and how you will logistically try to carry that out.
Certainly. So we've been aspiring to year-round for quite some time now, but the pandemic put a pause on it. The reason why we believe it's important is because we know the difficulties that teachers face in trying to just keep up pace with the change of the world of work. And summer alone is not enough of exposure for students to be able to really immerse themselves in the world of work. What we find, and success for us is defined if a student actually wants to continue in that career path, great. But in that one summer, let's say a student has in the back of their mind that they wanted to be an engineer, and so we get them into an engineering pathway with us in the summertime, and they've decided through their internship they no longer want to be an engineer. It's then what, right? And in order to be able to give them more than one experience, you really have to take advantage of that year-round opportunity. And it's just another way for students to connect their classroom with real work, right? For those of you who are math teachers and you struggle to figure out why to tell a 16-year-old they need to take pre-calculus if they want to be an engineer, we start making those connections with the hope that they can get inspired to really think through their classroom learning differently. And again, our plan is we're going to be piloting, hopefully in January of this year, with those virtual work experiences so students can experience 5 to 6 virtual experiences within their academic year and then be better prepared for their place-based opportunity so that it really then helps them through their senior year think about their college track, their training track, or straight into their career.
And you're also looking to pilot a paid internship as well, right?
We are, yes. And so for our virtual experience, and I'm just going to contextualize this to the urban core. So the city of Providence has made national news many times over for its historically low-performing district, and it's currently, it was taken over by the state in 2020. Full disclosure, I was a school board member there for 12 plus years, and really trying to turn the ship to really bring high-quality opportunities for our students, and it's just logistically difficult to do it during the day, trying to meet all the Common Core standards, trying to bring in innovation is never easy to do within a system. But one of the things that was clear is we have a high level of chronic absenteeism in our high school students, but many of our students are working, and they are not showing up to school because they are working and helping out their families. 67% of the students in the district are Latino, where English is not the primary language spoken at home, and many times those students, the minute they hit 16, are asked to go work. And so we want to turn these virtual work experiences into a paid opportunity so that they can work, still help with those family commitments, but then really learn about essential skills that they're going to need, and again, prepare them for the workforce differently. And we're hoping to stipend them each month to make up and offset those costs, see if we can get them back into the classroom, get them back in on time, really help move the needle on chronic absenteeism and academic performance in the school.
That's wonderful. So as you mentioned in your opening, Apprentice Learning is unique in that you focus on middle school. So talk a little bit about why you find middle school as the core time to start introducing these work-based learning experiences.
First of all, because I love the children. But we found that when young people who are 16, 17, 18, 15 go into the workforce, it's oftentimes their very first job, and they are not necessarily prepared. So there are things that happen, like showing up late, like not dressing accordingly for the job, not knowing or being afraid, right? So we start in 8th grade. We do a little bit of workplace exploration with them in 7th grade, but in 8th grade, we start off by walking into a classroom with all the 8th graders in a school, right, and saying, hey, who likes money? Is there anybody here who'd like a summer job, right? Well, we're the people that can show you how to get there. So we start at the speed of trust, right? We work with them for 6 weeks, teaching professional comportment. Some people might call these soft skills. We work primarily with Black and brown children. So I call them essential skills, right? So it's essential for them to know how to shake a hand in this particular environment, right? It does not, we also teach that it's not that it's better, right? It's teaching multilingual skills, right? How to code switch, some might know it as, right? So if you can dap someone up in your neighborhood or in your household, that is beautiful, and I can do it too, right? However, when you get into this particular environment, this is how these folks in this environment, in this job place right here, may shake a hand, right? Here's how you look someone in the eye. What is your learning style? Right? Because it's important for you as a young person to be able to know your learning style, because when you interface with someone who is going to be your supervisor, right? Can you tell them if you're a visual learner or a kinesthetic learner? Right? Can you tell them if you're an auditory learner, so that they can best show you how to do your job and you don't get marked as someone who can't do it, right? What are your signature strengths? So we do all of that for 6 weeks. And then in the course of that, we are asking them also, what are your dreams, what are your passions? Do you have an idea of a job you might be interested in? I am not as concerned about the particular job as I am about the passion, right? So then they get a list of different places that they could be sent for an apprenticeship. And there's usually about a list of 30 to 40 places, and all of these places are within 20 minutes via train or bus or walking distance from their school. And they leave during the, so they get that list and they get to pick about 5 of their top choices. Then we, with their families, with the school, vet, and with the young person, vet and figure out which one of the experience is going to be the best for them, right? We talk about how do you get there, we do the transportation, marketing, and everything. We then, at the end of that 6 weeks of training or workshops with them, we tell them, okay, next week's your day. You know, you get a nice jacket. Are you ready, right? And they're all like, yeah, we're definitely ready. And they definitely think they are. Right? And so the first...
They're in middle school.
Yeah, exactly. And the first day when they show up for it, some of them are very excited and they're gung-ho, and some of them are like, oh, I'm not doing that. So then we have a conversation. My point is all of this is relational. Right? So because we've worked with the school and we become part of an integral part of the community, right, with their families and with the young persons, always moving at the speed of trust, we can then say to that young person who's maybe not exactly thinking that they're ready because they're scared, hey, where's your favorite teacher? You know, oh, your buddy's going too. Or, I know you think you can't, but we're just gonna walk out there, we're gonna walk down the street to the bus with you, right? And so once they get there, and they do that for 6 weeks, and they do it during the school day, so they generally leave after lunch, and we give them a second lunch on the way out the door, because they're 8th graders and they're hungry. Next year, using the M-Blaze, we will have a different method of keeping in touch with them and making sure they're there. But generally, once they get to their work site, they have to call us from the work site, so we know that they're there. We also have our staff go around and check, not necessarily to check up on the kid per se, but to make sure that, not necessarily to make sure that they're there, because we know they're there. We've not lost a child yet. But to make sure that everybody's comfortable, right? Sometimes we don't even speak to the young person, we just wave or we don't wave, you know. But to make sure they're there, we check in with the worksite partner to see how everything's going about once a week. And then at the end of those 6 weeks, they then enter into launch for us, which is us helping every single 8th grader that we've touched get a summer job or a summer experience. And then, and that's the primary part of our program. There's more, you can read about it on our website, or I can talk to you later.
A question about, you talk a lot about teaching kids how to be workforce ready, but there's a huge cultural competency piece that comes from the employer side as well, particularly when you are welcoming in young people that have never experienced work before. How do you help train employers to be better prepared for accepting internships?
Wow, I did see that question before. And it is such a, it's again, relationship building, right? So what Apprentice Learning does and what I do personally is I believe that at the core of this, all of us want to do good work, right? And we might not necessarily know how. So I believe that there will be mistakes made along the way. One of the things we start off with employers is asking folks to learn our young people's names. Because if you can pronounce Arnold Schwarzenegger, and most people can, then it is also possible to pronounce Nirmalani Ngozi-Abiata, right? But we so often see a name and forget that it's possible to learn how to pronounce it, and that can set a young person's welcome off, right? We also ask for us to look, to understand, and to begin to unpack all of the structural, systemic, horrific, we can call them historical, but they're still happening, disparities, right? But to also understand that in all of that, there are connections to be made, right? So we believe in possibility, authenticity, and connection, and we work with our worksite partners to design apprenticeships that are real-world work experiences that everyone can connect to. So for instance, one thing that we do with our worksite partners is that, you know, a young person, like I said, we work primarily with Black and Latinx students, Cape Verdean students, Black diasporic, et cetera. And some of the workplace environments where young people go, they may not walk in the door or see anyone who looks like them, except in the elevator or the custodial staff, which we all know is a travesty, right? However, one of the points of connection could always be if our worksite partners recognize that there's a legacy of incredible work, of incredible careers that have been held by Black and Latinx diasporic people throughout, and Asian folks throughout history, right? And so having that in the back of your head so that you can bring someone else up who's an architect, right? Or just a name, or show some work. And yeah, things such as that. Sorry.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So, Bob, let's turn to you. So, workforce readiness has been a big priority for the Baker administration all along, and there have been significant increases in state investment in a variety of youth skill building programs. Talk a little bit about some of the highlights there in the work specifically and work-based learning that you've been trying to foster the last few years.
Sure. So for us, work-based learning, I think as my colleagues talked about, is really a continuum. And we here in the Commonwealth look at that continuum of the workplace readiness, workplace exposure into a work experience. We have historically had pretty strong process for students who have been enrolled in our occupational pathways. And those are, we don't call them vocational, we call them occupational. And with that representing about 15% of our students who are required as part of the structure to have those experiences in either an employer-based, work-based experience. Those students go a week on, a week off, so it's a much more flexible schedule, or a shop-based, externally facing experience, so they're engaging with the public or they're engaging with employers. We have worked on other pathways. The past panel talked a little bit about them, that is trying to grow the base of those students to participate. One of the things we found was there are a ton in Massachusetts of little programs, all doing things very differently, some incredibly good work, but not scalable. So where the administration has been focused is both on how do we build out intentional pathways, very similar to Rhode Island. Rhode Island was one of the states we worked with and shared information as part of the New Skills for Youth, of how to build pathways that are intentional, that incorporate work-based learning. So in that case, those are our sector-based. How do you expose students to the growth sectors in the Commonwealth? And then within those sectors, how do you ensure that the program has technical courses, college-level courses, career readiness, alignment to all types of post-secondary education, and then has embedded work-based learning and work-based credentials. And so for us, it's been the intentionality of the program design as being important, and that really was the work over the last 4 years where we've been building out. We now, I think, about 60 schools doing innovation pathways. And then looking at all the various programs. For us, whether that's federally funded YouthWorks, state dollars that sit on top of YouthWorks, what we have called Connecting Activities that serves about 10,000 students and provides coaching and mentoring support, but didn't provide some of the other issues that people are trying to resolve that mentioned. So what we've been really focused on in the last year of this journey is how do you build scalable programs, and the administration has recently looked at investing resources through STEM internships to close the gap. For us, it was transportation. So we also went to virtual platforms, partnership with Northeastern and Proctera to scale work-based learning strategies. Payroll. learning from our friends at RIDE, and I remember going down and visiting with them, which is probably 4 years ago now, maybe 5, I heard, is we run payroll now through our career centers in many cases, who really aren't prepared to do the joint relationship with labor, economic development, and education of piloting potentially this year a centralized statewide system that would allow students to enroll and be supported in one payroll system through the Commonwealth, and it's not out for anybody outside of there. Anybody from the media, I didn't say that. I just got myself in trouble, but we are in the process of doing that. It was announced by Lieutenant Governor of our STEM Council funding. And then the last part of that was the realization that for a lot of employers, they were getting engaged from a lot of different places, but not a consistent message. So trying to structure that to a more consistent message. And then the last part was realizing that there are employers who are adverse to risk.
Yep.
And part of that risk is a fiscal risk and a liability risk. So in the Commonwealth, we do have strategies that are in the law that reduce the liability risk for employers, but the fiscal risk was the thing that we came back to often of. You can remove the fiscal, and I'm not sure how much that's true or an excuse, we're gonna find out. But we have just committed $4 million a few months ago to pay and stipend students who participate in internships, with priority given to those students who are in innovation pathways. What that is going to do is allow us to leverage all the other resources that provide infrastructure and then remove the barrier of dollars, putting dollars in that, and that may be available for administrative dollars and student support dollars, transportation. You know, this, for a lot of people, they go, well, what do you mean students can't get a bus pass? Well, they can't get a bus pass. They need bus passes to get jobs. They need vouchers. We have to pay them. So for us, it's been a journey of how do you put a very complicated puzzle together, and as you move forward, how do you take these resources that do different things and try to build them into a scalable system? And I think we're closer than we were 5 years ago, and I can tell you that for the governor and lieutenant governor, it certainly wasn't done fast enough by the team, but as I explained to him, there was a pandemic and then it right? So it takes a lot of puzzle pieces to try to get to a scalable model.
So I think one of the biggest puzzle pieces that we see for that scalable model really is the employer piece, Bob, right? You know, Secretary Pizer and Lieutenant Governor had an op-ed in the Globe just a couple of weeks ago, really calling on employers to be more actively engaged, because without their participation, these opportunities are not possible. So you talked a little bit about the risks associated. Are there other policy barriers that you can envision the Commonwealth implementing that might work to increase employer engagement in these opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, from the policy standpoint, one of the things that longer term is that employers want to develop a relationship with a high school student, but then they want to continue it. So as we've been having these dialogues about building a more scalable, systematic approach, it has to then roll over to how does it become a deeper and more immersive post-secondary apprenticeship and or post-secondary internship. So there's a lot of policy dialogues that need to happen in there. How do you fund it? How do you support it? The other part that, because of our relationship with labor and economic development that we have deployed, that I think is key to it, is using ARPA dollars. One of the things that we found was there were too many people knocking on the same doors, whether it was for workforce training programs, community colleges running programs, adult basic ed running programs, student internship programs. Everybody's knocking on the same doors with a different spin. So one of the things that, from a policy standpoint, is we have put in each of our regions what we don't have a good title for, but probably that we call market makers, right? So we have hired through the state in each region a market maker who is essential to be the liaison between the employer community and the various training providers, because that's the other element. In a small community or a big community, there can be multiple training providers, internship providers, and somebody needs to be the filtering agent. So that was a big policy step for us to get those in place. They're attached to our regional planning process for WIOA, and to be, again, a more consistent voice and relationship builder. So those are some of the policy changes that are relatively new.
this is a question for all of you. So we talked a little bit about the fact that these experiences are limited in the ability of students to, have transportation to get there. I need to be paid. We know that social capital and the fact that a lot of internships are, based on who you know, it has historically been how it works. How do we prioritize equity in building new programs and expanding access to these programs? Maybe I'll start with you. You can go ahead, Ellen.
Sure. So I think a few things, and I think what we've seen, and I'm going to just kind of talk a little bit about our dollars, right? Like equity is built into it, right? And so I love seeing more and more funders making that a priority and holding agencies like myself accountable to that. And then we also need to, I think, appeal to the corporate social responsibility piece that our employers bring to the table. We hear from our employers all the time that they're trying to hire for diversity, equity, inclusion, and led to kind of what you were talking about, that belonging, right, and making sure that people belong in those environments. So they have to be a part of that conversation and making sure that they understand truly what does that mean. And that's part of our mission, is being able to create access to opportunities and making sure that there's equity in there. I think one of the biggest challenges, and this is something I actually was talking with folks in our state earlier today about our funding. Funding equity looks very different, and I think that people need to understand what funding equity means. And I think in order for us to get to those equitable outcomes, starting in elementary school, middle school is actually what we need to be doing, so that students can build their confidence, their courage, kind of their psychological being, that they belong in an environment that may look very unfamiliar to them, to expose them when they're 16, 17, and 18, when they come to me in their place-based opportunities. For some, it's often too late. And so I love the fact that, Letta, that you start at that middle school level. We even need to start earlier than that. And we need to figure out how to weave it into the school day so that it becomes part of the natural conversation. So students are learning a different vocabulary. They are experiencing different things. They're touching things and feeling things very differently. And here again, I think this is where technology becomes our friend.
Yeah.
How do we stream into classrooms those work experiences? But I think for me, when you talk about equity, one, you've got to have policies that you set for yourself and goals that you set for yourself, and you don't waver from them. And then you advocate like heck to make sure that you can get it paid for, and that you try to expose students again at a younger and younger age so that they have those resources there. If it were easy, we wouldn't be having the conversation. It's difficult. But the bottom line is, I think, again, if you deviate or you dilute what equity is really intended to mean, you're not going to get great outcomes. And so we always set the bar high, and it's our goal and it's our staff goal to make sure that every child who comes through our program meets the very high standards. And I say this to my team. My niece and nephew were born privileged. Their goal, my dad will still complain that they didn't go to Harvard, but that was the goal, and that's what they were built for. And so that's the litmus test for every child for us. It's not how do we adjust our expectations based on where you come in. It's how do you keep the expectations high, and then how do we work triply, quadruply hard to make sure that that child meets that same standard.
Anyone like to add to that?
Go ahead.
So, yes, and yes, and yes. I would like to add that it's important for me to say that equity is a long game, right? That it is a goal, and that we as a community, as a country, in this work have not yet reached it. That before the equity, it's diversity and inclusion and belonging. And when we have, when we get to the place where we're not saying come sit at the table, but we're saying, hey, where would we like to eat? And how can we do this together? Then we'll get equity, right? And I think there's two things that that would be helpful, or the way to think about this. The first one is that for folks of more economic means, right, when they're about to have a child, sometimes they teach the child language in the belly, right? So there's like learn French while you're in the womb, right? And that's considered like something like amazing, and it's like forward thinking, and it is the Harvard track, for instance, right? If a person comes to this country and they speak 6 languages and none of them are English, they're seen, we're looking at them in a deficit-based perspective, and that is incorrect, right? I will tell you that all of my kids, and all of your kids probably, right, are already mathematicians and astronomers and doctors and entrepreneurs and all of those things. The language that we have been using, which is deficit-based, which is around what they don't have, needs to be changed, right? It's more around what we haven't done yet, what we haven't done yet in the service of them.
So that was, yeah, it's a hard follow, but I think so I agree with everything that's been said, and so kind of on a sort of more practical level, I think one of the things that we look at, or I look at and think about in that big picture, is we really put the students at the center of it, and it's about, I think you spoke about this earlier too, but it's about students finding their interest and passion, and every student has an interest and passion, and every student should pursue that, should learn about that interest and passion. And so it's about opportunity and access and building networks and building multiple networks. And so students in big picture schools, and we would love to see this across all schools, are having multiple different experiences. And that speaks to the equity issue, because to equity, we want all students to be able to say, well, this is my interest, and let me look and see what the opportunities are, and I'll try this out, and then build a connection with an adult. So that's a huge piece too. I'm looking at you're looking at time.
I heard that. I thought I was going to do lunch. So I would say for us, interestingly, the dialogue really became, we didn't know what was happening. And I know that sounds silly, but there are many different programs, and we didn't have very much information. And so we started with where do we have data or not have data? Right? We can't evaluate programs if we didn't have any data. So just starting from the school perspective is, if students were participating in internships in the Commonwealth, did we have data on it? The answer was no, not 5 years ago. Now we have very specific course codes that we can look at different types of data, run that against demographics, run that against communities, run what programs they in or not in, to start to look and say, what are the barriers to entry? So number one. Number two, looking at other types of programs, whether it's youth works or connecting activities, and saying, how do we start to look at the data systems between them to evaluate them? And as you start to do that, even at early blushes, one of the things that becomes apparent is, I think what other people noted was, in part, what communities are these happening in and not? And then it becomes a question of invitation, invisibility. And as somebody who drives a lot around the Commonwealth, I can tell you that it is an interesting conversation when you go into community and industry leaders in their region and you show them a map of, look what's happening in all these other communities, but there's no internships in yours. And they go, well, that can't be true. And my answer is, well, it could be true. It could be that you're doing it, we don't know that you're doing it. But more importantly, we're inviting you to participate, and here are the people that we can connect you with. And so if we want to build geographic reach and diversity into all communities, then we have to have better data on what's happening or not happening in our internship and what they're learning than we did historically.
Great. So we're almost at time. I want one final question for each of you. And so much like Big Picture Learning, one of ASA's goals is to ensure that every high school student has work-based learning experience prior to graduating, prior to leaving high school. So what is one thing that we can do to make that a reality?
One thing that ASA can
Or what we collectively can do to make sure every high school student has access to work-based learning experience prior to high school?
For me, it would be trying to help remove the traditional barriers of education in a public school system and getting creative and innovative so that we can bring it into the classroom more and more.
For me, it is to look up Apprentice Learning and to join us as a worksite partner. And if it's not us, then to find another organization, any of these folks that are up here, and do the same.
So I was going to actually kind of similar to that, I was going to say I think part of it is community partners, building community partners that, and helping them understand that there are programs and there are people and there are schools, that there are opportunities, and building those connections and relationships. And also, one more thing, making sure you keep students at the center of it, always, always.
Bob, final word?
What they said. I think for us, it's intentional design. Really, it's really taking community leaders, people from around the country, learn what's working, and then figure out how to scale it. You know, here in the Commonwealth, we're blessed to be here in Boston today. I can tell you Boston is very different than the Berkshires. And we have to realize that all students, that's a key word that we always say, all students, all types of students in all areas of the Commonwealth, we have to develop systems that work. And that means you have to have lots of options for them to pick from to make it work in their community, but still be intentional.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us. Great conversation. I'm sure there'll be